Hi, good morning. My name is Jordan Robertson. I'm a cybersecurity reporter here with Bloomberg News in Washington, D.C., and welcome to Digital Defense. This is going to be our weekly new show on cybersecurity where we try to offer some perspective on the week's worth of cybersecurity news and, most importantly, offer some tips for those of you out there who may be wondering how to interpret some of this news and, what, if anything, you should do about some of these attacks and how to protect yourself. And this, as I said, is the inaugural episode, and for this episode, we wanted to talk about the massive internet outage that we saw last week. It was, as many of you may be aware, it was a major attack on some of the internet's critical infrastructure. Knocked out websites from Netflix to Twitter to Reddit to CNN on Friday, and I wanted to give you a little bit of background about how that attack happened and some interesting peculiarities about this attack that make it a very unusual type of hacking attack. So, by way of quick background, on Friday, as you'll see from the map behind us, a massive amount of internet traffic took out websites starting on the West Coast and then spreading, starting on the East Coast and spreading to the West Coast. And you can see here, the pockets of outages were pretty broad. And what happened here was the internet's domain name system was attacked. These sites that I mentioned, they themselves weren't down necessarily, but the routes to get to them were down. And when you hear about this attack being called, one of the biggest in internet history, to give you some perspective on that, some researchers have said that the attack was 1 terabyte per second of internet traffic. And to give you some context on how much traffic that was attacking this domain name service provider, if you stream Netflix around the clock without interruption for about a month, that would be about 1 terabyte of traffic. So that's the amount of traffic that was hitting this particular domain name service provider per second on Friday morning, leading to these outages. And what that basically did was cut off all the routes from internet providers to these websites. What that meant was if you were trying to access Twitter or Netflix or wherever, you weren't able to get there because the route was closed off. Now, the significance of this attack was that these weren't ordinary computers attacking these websites. These were home DVRs and home webcams that had been commandeered for this attack. And the significance of that is it's very hard for internet providers to protect against those types of attacks because these devices haven't been used in attacks before. They're basically clean. So you can't be in the business of blocking clean traffic on the internet. And one of the things we wanted to do with this show, which will be really important, is we wanted to solicit questions from the audience. This is supposed to be a conversation. We dive pretty deeply into some of these subjects, and we want you to be able to ask any questions that you may have about the attack and what you should do about it. And one of the questions that's come in is what's being done to prevent future attacks like this one. It's an interesting question. As I mentioned, these were not normal computers attacking this domain name service provider. These were webcams and DVRs. So what internet providers are doing now is developing new technological signatures to detect attacks coming from these devices. And that's a different process than protecting against computers attacking these websites. And the challenge here, again, is that if you're a consumer and you've plugged one of these devices into your home network, chances are you haven't changed the default password. And what I want to show you next is where these attacks came from. These are all the home internet connected devices that were lashed together and used to attack this domain name service provider, which was called DYN, D-Y-N. And as you can see, you see large pockets of infections in Southeast Asia, in Europe, in the US, in Latin America. And what you're seeing here are thousands upon thousands of these webcams and DVRs being infected. And the way they're being infected is people haven't changed the default passwords on these devices. You plug them into your internet connection, and you don't know that what they're doing is broadcasting to the internet lots and lots of information about themselves that hackers can then just kind of grab out of the air and say, look for this device with this default password. If the owner hasn't changed the password, just log in and start using it for attacks. So one of the key pieces of advice that I would give is when you get these devices, if you're given the chance to change the default password, even if you change it to something simple, changing from the default is a really important thing to do. We've got another question coming in. Where were the attackers? Were the attackers from Friday identified? Well, In terms of public information, not specifically, but there have been some clues about their level of sophistication. So it's an interesting question. You would think that an attack that takes out a large percentage of the internet infrastructure would be like a nation-state attack. I mean, governments have the ability to shut down the internet in the case of war. This wasn't that at all. The initial signs are that these were, what are called script kiddies. These were some guys who had a clever idea of how to mount a really effective denial of service attack, but their level of sophistication, from all the points of evidence that we have so far, was actually pretty low, which is a pretty terrifying thought that these weren't, these weren't the top-level hackers. The term script kiddie refers to, it's kind of a pejorative term in the hacking community for somebody who knows how to write a basic programming script and use it for an attack. These are not elite hackers. These are folks who know a few things about hacking, but in general are not a real risk, and they perform low-level attacks. In this case, these may have been lower-skilled hackers, but they had a very clever and very effective idea. And that's part of the danger of these types of attacks is as we move to this era of the Internet of Things, which are non-PC things that are connected to the internet, like DVRs and webcams and thermostats and things like that. These are computers like anything else that are connected to the internet, and hackers can hackers can compromise these things and mount these really massive attacks. Another question coming in is, what are some of the leading cybersecurity programs out there? Well, I'll say this, everybody who has a home router, your first line of defense shouldn't be a security program. It really should be, if you've got a home router, change the default passwords there. It's like you can't say that enough. That's going to be more effective for you than any type of cybersecurity program you might buy from the store. So you'll save yourself some money. Change the default password. That means anybody who can see your router on the internet, it'll just be a little bit harder for them to break into. And in terms of cybersecurity programs, it's always helpful to have something like an antivirus program. They're kind of going out of vogue, but they're very effective at preventing unauthorized access to your computer from lower level types of attacks. And the next graphic I want to show you is another interesting one. These are the default passwords that the hackers in this particular attack were looking for. So I mentioned scripts before. They basically wrote a script that said, go out on the internet, find these types of devices that use these combinations of usernames and passwords. And as you can see, they're really basic. Admin, root. Some of these are, curse words, but the passwords are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are just the defaults that come from the factory. And so this is like an illustration where you can see if your device is broadcasting to the internet and this is all the security it has on it, for a hacker, they just log in. There's no real hack even. It's just identifying, a weak point, on the internet. We got another question. How would you know if you're affected by this hack? Is it always obvious? It's a very good question because the company whose products were affected in this case, the Chinese manufacturer of DVR and webcam chips and components, they're what you call a white label manufacturer. So they make these things and then they sell them to companies that resell them under their own brand. So, if you're going to go look today at your DVR or webcam, you may not see that Chinese firm's name. You'll see Comcast, you'll see something else. So that's why it's kind of hard to know if your device was affected by this specific hack. But what you can do, again, is you change the default password. Sometimes resetting the device is enough to wipe these attacks out because you think about it, these are very small computers. They don't have nearly the power of your home PC. So that means they don't have a lot of memory either. So a lot of these attacks kind of exist solely in the memory of the computer. You turn it off, the memory is cleared, and you turn it back on, and the attackers are gone. So these are not the kind of deep-seated attacks that the malware will stay on your home device forever, because that's a pretty terrifying thought, especially if you've got the webcam trained at your kid's crib or something like that. We've got another question coming in. Thank you for everybody for the questions. The devices should be sold without default passwords. What are your thoughts? Well, another good question. It depends on where you live and what your providers are. But like if you sign up for a new, let's say Comcast internet service, what they're supposed to do is come to your house, install the router, install the DVR, and change the default password for you. That's kind of like best practice. So that means you as a consumer don't even need to do anything. You just write down the new password, you can change it to something you want, you can continue to use that default, and that's okay. I mean, the problem is these devices have to come from the factory with some sort of default. There's some sort of way for users to for the company to have some control over how they're produced. But I absolutely agree. I mean, the first thing that should be done is when you plug them in, is not just let's just connect this to the internet. It's you need to change this to something else. You need to change your password to something else. And if you're like a lot of us, you plug these things into your home computer, your home wireless connection. That's the last thing you're going to think about. It's just kind of like it's a little gadget, on your home network. What kind of threat could it provide? And this attack is an example that it's a pretty serious one. Another question here is, does it matter if you use WAP, WAP2, or WEP network on your router? These are different kinds of wireless encryption protocols. For this type of attack, this is not an example of an attacker coming in from the outside, kind of compromising weak internet encryption. So this is a good question because you should have good encryption on your router. You should have good security so that if I'm sitting outside your house, I can't just log in because you don't have any encryption and I can see everything you're doing. So in that sense, having good encryption on your home network is extremely important. But in this case, it's not really it's not really a matter of encryption. It's a matter of default passwords. Again, these devices are broadcasting out to the internet basically everything about who they are, what they're doing. I'm Jordan's webcam. I'm Jordan's DVR. I'm this model number on this year. And if you're a hacker that knows what the default password is, like you see here, you're in. I mean, you're behind the encryption. And that's kind of the dangerous part. And so my advice to people on these questions is always, do basic cybersecurity things. And you'll hear this from even the most elite levels of hackers. You make it significantly harder to break into your computer if you do some basic things. Now, if a government wants to come after you and break into your computer, if the NSA wants into your computer, they're going to get there. If the NSA wants into your home webcam, they're going to get there. But attackers like these, if these are really script kiddies doing this kind of attack, they're just going to walk right on by. They're going to see you've changed your password, and they're just going to keep going. Won't even know your thing exists. And another interesting aspect of this attack was that the Chinese manufacturer did a kind of unprecedented thing in cybersecurity. They issued a recall of these devices. They said, you could return these devices and we'll replace them with the newer model that isn't vulnerable to these attacks, that has a different protocol for connecting to these devices. Now, if you're using these devices, it's not like you're going to get something in the mail. Nobody's going to call you up. The company kind of posts a note on its website, which nobody's going to go to unless you're a reporter looking into the story. And that's the only way you're going to know. So it is valuable to check out your hardware, especially if you live in some of the places like we saw earlier. If you live in some of these regions like Latin America, U.S., EU, Southeast Asia, in many places these devices are not sold as white label. They're sold under the Chinese manufacturer's name. So if you do have this model number, and manufacturer, it would be good practice to look it up and see what the recall process is. If you're using the technology under a white label, you may have to dig a little bit further. You may have to turn over the box, see if you can find clues that this is the case. But changing your password is going to be far easier. We've got another question here. My network has 2 logins. We have a guest network which has no password, and the network we use had a strong password. Is the guest network an open door? Well, you kind of answered the question in the question. Having no password is the equivalent of having no security at all. However, the fact that your primary network has a strong password, that does make it harder to get into your network because without knowing the how your network is actually configured, the guest network should be kind of a child of the primary network. So, but again, if you've got kind of an open door in your network that doesn't have any password, somebody who's determined enough could absolutely open that. That's kind of just an accident waiting to happen. We've got another one. What are some tips for creating good passwords that aren't totally easy to guess? I like this question because 10 years ago we advised people to make the craziest passwords possible, like use some random password generator on the internet, and it would come up with some 20 or 30 character thing you'd have to write down, and it's just gibberish. Now it's not the case that you need to do that anymore because we have what's called 2-factor authentication. You can sign up for, especially for your internet accounts, to get a text message alert to your cell phone when somebody tries to log into your account. What that means is you don't have to create the craziest passwords in the world anymore. You should still try to do basic internet hygiene, which is, if there's a word or a phrase that's significant to you, add numbers, add letters, add caps, add symbols, you know, but we've kind of moved beyond the days where you have to create the impenetrable password because that was the only line of defense against getting into your account. Now you can use reasonably strong passwords plus two-factor authentication. Now that's not the case for these webcams and DVRs, but for internet accounts and email and things like that, you know, that's a really strong process. You know, there are, you know, we really want to thank everybody, you know, who's tuned in today, and everybody's asked questions. As we said, this is a new program for us. We're going to be doing it every Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern, and again, kind of wrapping up the week's worth of cybersecurity news and offering, you know, guidance and perspective on things like this. So we hope that you join us again. And you know, we really value this audience participation, and we hope it's useful. We look at these issues a lot, and we hope we have something useful to offer everybody. So with that, we'll sign off, and thanks again to everybody who's watching, and we'll see you next week on Digital Defense.